In 1990, rising star Carina Lau vanished from the streets of Hong Kong, abducted by the infamous Triads. For 12 agonizing years, the terrifying secret of what happened to her remained hidden, a silent trauma shared only with her partner, the legendary Tony Leung. When a shocking photograph from that night was maliciously published, it didn't break her, it ignited a revolution. This is the story of a brutal crime, a decade of fear, and a love that conquered all. For more incredible true stories, make sure you subscribe to our channel below. The night air of April 1990 in Hong Kong was thick with the promise of rain and the electric hum of a city that never slept. Neon signs painted the streets in strokes of brilliant red, gold, and blue, reflecting off the wet pavement and the sleek hoods of expensive cars. It was a city of dizzying heights and deep, hidden valleys, a place where fortunes were made overnight, and where the line between glamour and danger was often blurred. For Carina Lau, a rising star in the city's booming film industry, this world was her stage. At 24, she possessed a vibrant energy and a talent that had already captured the public's imagination. She was on the cusp of true stardom, navigating the exhilarating but treacherous currents of fame. On this particular night, she was behind the wheel of her car, heading to a friend's apartment. The plan was simple: a casual evening of mahjong, a welcome break from the demanding schedules of filming. The streets were familiar, the rhythm of the city a comforting backdrop to her thoughts. But in an instant, the familiar became terrifying. Her car was abruptly cut off, its path blocked. Before she could fully process what was happening, her doors were wrenched open. Rough hands grabbed her. The world dissolved into a blur of shouting, the screech of tires, and the cold, sharp sting of fear. She was pulled from her own car and forced into another, the door slamming shut with a sound of finality that echoed the sudden closing of a chapter in her life. The city lights streaked past the windows, no longer a beautiful spectacle, but a taunting reminder of a world she had just been violently torn from. For 3 agonizing hours, Carina Lau was a prisoner. The men who took her were not ghosts. They were enforcers, the muscle of the Triads, the organized crime syndicates whose tentacles were deeply embedded in the fabric of Hong Kong society, including the lucrative film industry. The reason for her abduction was, in their world, a simple matter of business. She had refused a role in a film, a project backed by powerful figures who did not take no for an answer. Her defiance was seen as an insult, a challenge to their authority that required a lesson in compliance. Her captivity was that lesson. She was stripped of her dignity, forced into a position of utter helplessness, and photographed in her most vulnerable state. It was a calculated act of humiliation, a weapon to be held over her head, a permanent reminder of who held the real power. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. She was released back into the night, left on a quiet street to grapple with the enormity of what had just happened. In the immediate aftermath, a different kind of prison took shape around her, one built of fear and silence. Going to the police was not an option. In the Hong Kong of that era, reporting a crime committed by the Triads was like declaring war on an invisible, all-powerful empire. Witnesses disappeared, cases went cold, and victims often found their careers and lives systematically dismantled. To speak out was to risk everything. So, a decision was made, born not of weakness, but of a terrifyingly clear understanding of her reality. The ordeal would remain a secret. She would bury the trauma, seal it away from the public, and try to move forward. She had to return to the film sets, to the cameras, to the interviews, and pretend that the world was the same as it had been just hours before. She had to smile when all she wanted to do was scream. Word of her disappearance, however brief, had already reached her partner, the intensely private and talented actor Tony Leung. He was on a film set when he heard the news, and his world stopped. The carefully constructed focus he brought to his craft shattered. Without a second thought, he abandoned the production, his only concern finding Carina. When they were finally reunited, The relief was immense but heavy, layered with the unspoken horror of her experience. In the quiet moments that followed, Tony became her anchor. He didn't need to know every detail to understand the depth of her pain. He saw the shadow that had fallen over her, the new fragility in her eyes. He wrapped her in a cocoon of protection and unwavering support, becoming the one person with whom she did not have to pretend. While the world saw Carina Lau, the resilient actress, he saw the woman who was fighting to piece her life back together. He listened when she needed to talk and sat with her in silence when words were too painful. His steadfast presence was a quiet act of defiance against the men who had tried to break her, a promise that she would not face the darkness alone. This shared trauma forged their bond into something unbreakable, a partnership that would be tested by years of silence and eventually by the public explosion of the very secret they fought so hard to keep. For 12 years, the ghost of that terrifying night in 1990 remained chained in the darkest corner of Carina Lau's memory. Life had moved on as it must. She and Tony Leung had built a life together, a partnership that became one of Hollywood's Eastern equivalent's most beloved and enduring love stories. Their careers had soared to new heights, their faces gracing movie posters and magazine covers across Asia. The trauma was a scar, hidden beneath layers of success, glamour, and the quiet strength of their shared life. It was a private history, a silent pact between them. They had survived it. They had moved past it. They thought the worst was over. But in October 2002, the ghost broke free, not as a whisper, but as a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the entire city. It appeared on newsstands, a weapon disguised as a magazine. The cover of East Week, a sensationalist tabloid known for its aggressive tactics, featured a photograph that stopped the heart of anyone who saw it. It was a grainy, black and white image of a woman in utter distress. Her face was a mask of terror and tears. Her clothes were disheveled, and her eyes were wide with a horror that felt immediate and raw. Though her face was partially obscured, the woman was unmistakably Carina Lau. It was the photograph taken by her captors all those years ago, a trophy of their cruelty, a secret she thought was buried forever. The magazine had bought it and published it for one reason: to sell copies. They had taken her deepest trauma, a moment of profound violation, and turned it into a commodity. The publication was an act of breathtaking cruelty, a second violation that was in many ways more public and more humiliating than the first. The past was no longer the past. It was front-page news. The city reeled. A collective gasp of shock and disgust swept through Hong Kong. For Carina and Tony, it was a waking nightmare. The fragile peace they had so carefully constructed over more than a decade was shattered in an instant. The public humiliation was immense. Every stranger on the street could now gaze upon her at her most broken and vulnerable. The world expected her to disappear. In a culture that often prized saving face above all else, the logical move was to retreat from the public eye, to issue a quiet denial, to hide until the storm passed. The wound was too deep, the shame too public. But the woman who emerged in the days that followed was not the same one who had been pulled from her car 12 years earlier. The years of carrying her secret had forged an iron resilience within her. She had already survived the worst. She would not be broken by the memory of it. She decided she would not hide. She would fight back. The battle began with a press conference. The room was packed with a frenzied sea of reporters and photographers, the air electric with anticipation. When Carina Lau walked out, a hush fell over the crowd. She was flanked by Tony Leung and other titans of the film industry, their presence a silent, formidable shield. She looked directly into the glare of the flashing cameras, her expression not one of shame, but of resolute defiance. Tony stood slightly behind her, his face grim, his gaze fixed on her, a pillar of unshakable support. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. Though laced with an emotion that was impossible to conceal, she did not deny it. She did not deflect. She looked the world in the eye and owned her story. "I am here today," she began, her words cutting through the silence. "Because what that magazine did is not just an attack on me. It is an attack on the morality of all people." She confirmed that she was the woman in the photograph and condemned the magazine as a purveyor of filth, a publication that profited from human suffering. It was a moment of profound courage. In that room, she transformed herself. She was no longer a victim of the Triads or the media. She was a survivor, a leader, a woman reclaiming her own narrative from those who had tried to steal it. Her bravery ignited a firestorm. The Hong Kong entertainment industry, an ecosystem often defined by rivalries and competition, unified in a way it never had before. Her stand became their stand. A few days later, the city witnessed an extraordinary sight. Thousands of people took to the streets, marching in a massive protest against East Week and the gutter journalism it represented. Leading the march were the biggest names in Asian cinema: Jackie Chan, Anita Mui, and Leslie Cheung, luminous stars who were practically royalty, walked side by side with fellow actors, directors, singers, and crew members. They wore black t-shirts emblazoned with Chinese characters that translated to intolerance. The message was clear. A line had been crossed. The protest was a powerful, visceral display of solidarity, a roar of collective outrage that reverberated across the globe. It was a declaration that an artist's dignity was not for sale, and that the media had a moral responsibility that it had grotesquely failed to uphold. The public joined the chorus, their anger fueling the movement. The pressure became unbearable. The parent company of East Week was forced to issue a public apology. The magazine's editor was arrested, and its presses were silenced for good. The magazine ceased publication, a swift and decisive victory for the movement Carina Lau had so courageously started. She had faced down her demons in the most public way imaginable, and had not only survived, but had sparked a revolution in media ethics, forever changing the relationship between the press and the stars they cover. The storm of 2002 passed, leaving behind a strange and altered landscape. The offending magazine was gone, a testament to the power of a collective voice. But for Carina Lau and Tony Leung, the silence that followed was filled with the complex work of healing, not in secret, but in the full glare of the public eye that now saw them differently. They were no longer just a glamorous power couple. They were survivors, their shared history now a part of their public identity. It was in their art, in the cinematic worlds they inhabited, that the echoes of their real-life drama would resonate most profoundly, creating a strange and beautiful feedback loop between the characters they played and the people they had become. Looking back, the parallels were there from the very beginning, hiding in plain sight. In 1990, the same year she was abducted, Carina gave one of her most iconic early performances in the film Days of Being Wild. She played Mimi, a fiery and fiercely passionate showgirl, a woman of dazzling confidence who was, beneath the surface, achingly vulnerable and desperate for a sense of permanence and love that constantly eluded her. On screen, she chased after a man who could never be caught, her heart breaking over and over again. It is an almost unbearably poignant coincidence that, as she was embodying this character's search for stability, her own life was being violently destabilized in a way she could never have imagined. The raw emotion she brought to Mimi, the mix of bravado and fragility, felt hauntingly authentic. It was the performance of a woman navigating a world of profound uncertainty, both on and off the screen. And in that same film, Tony Leung appeared only in the final moments. He had no lines, no interaction with Carina's character. He was simply a solitary, handsome man in a small room, meticulously getting dressed, preparing to embark on his own story. In retrospect, his brief, enigmatic presence feels symbolic of the man who, behind the scenes, was quietly preparing to become the steady, silent anchor in Carina's turbulent life. If Days of Being Wild was an accidental prophecy, the 2004 film 2046 was a conscious reflection. Made in the wake of the photo scandal, it saw Carina and Tony reunited on screen, their chemistry now imbued with the weight of everything the world knew they had endured together. Tony played a writer, a man drifting through life, haunted by memories of lost love, emotionally walled off from the world. Carina, in a powerful and tragic turn, reprised her role as Mimi. Now years later, her spirit battered but not extinguished, still entangled in a web of love and loss. Their scenes together were electric with an unspoken history. When his character looked at hers, the audience could not separate the fiction from the reality. They saw a man who had stood by a woman through an unspeakable ordeal. They saw a shared past that was deeper and more complex than any script could convey. The film is a labyrinth of memory, time, and regret. And at its heart were two performers whose real lives had given them a unique and profound understanding of those very themes. Their art was no longer imitating life, it was communing with it. Having faced down her past and reclaimed her story, Carina found a new sense of peace, a strength that radiated from her. The final, triumphant chapter in their public saga of love and resilience was written not on a film set, but in the tranquil mountains of Bhutan. In 2008, after a nearly 2-decade-long relationship that had weathered the most brutal of storms, Carina Lau and Tony Leung were married. They chose a location that was the antithesis of the chaotic Hong Kong media world, a remote spiritual kingdom known for measuring its success in gross national happiness. The ceremony was a stunning celebration, a gathering of their closest friends and family, far from the flashbulbs and intrusive questions. It was more than a wedding. It was a coronation of their endurance. It was a declaration that their love, tested by organized crime, media malfeasance, and years of silent trauma, had not only survived but had deepened into something sacred. The images from that day showed a couple radiant with a joy that felt earned and profound. In the years since, Carina has fully stepped into her role as an icon of strength. She speaks of the kidnapping not with the raw pain of a victim, but with the calm wisdom of a survivor who has integrated the experience into the fabric of who she is. She has forgiven, she has said, not for the sake of those who wronged her, but for her own peace. Together, she and Tony remain at the pinnacle of Asian cinema, revered for their immense talent and for the grace with which they have conducted their lives. Their story has transcended the confines of celebrity gossip to become a modern-day legend, a powerful narrative about the enduring power of love, the courage to face down darkness, and the ultimate triumph of the human spirit. They prove that a person's worst moment does not have to define them. Instead, it can be the very thing that reveals their incredible capacity for resilience and grace. Carina Lau's story is a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit. She transformed from a victim of a horrific crime into a symbol of defiance and grace, refusing to let others write her narrative. Her journey, supported by the unwavering love of Tony Leung, proves that even the deepest wounds can be healed and that courage can inspire monumental change. Their legacy is one of resilience, love, and ultimate triumph. To explore more stories of survival and strength, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for new videos every week.